None of Rebecca's usual group had been at dinner. The little girl, Masha, had been picking at her food when she sat down, but she'd left pretty quickly, saying she wasn't really hungry. Dex had been there, but only in body. She knew he'd taken a shower after the exams. His hair was still wet, but she could swear there was still blood on his face. She knew about the kid in the red band exam that had gotten his head popped, but she hadn't realized that Dex might have been closer to the action than she imagined. The big boy kept looking over at the table, not too far away, where Ryan was talking with the other red bands. They all looked much the worse for wear, but it appeared that Ryan had impressed them today. They had invited Dex to come join them, but he had declined. He seemed to be hoping that Ryan would decline as well, but it appeared that whatever had happened had changed their friendship quite a bit. Gerald was sitting with someone else for a change, a girl with a white band on her arm. The two of them were chatting animatedly, and Rebecca couldn't help but feel a little jealous. Gerald had been her shadow since she had arrived, and it was weird to be without him. She remembered thinking he would drift off eventually. Most boys did, once they made some real friends, but he'd stuck it out, and she was more than a little sad at the thought that he might not be a constant companion anymore. Of Dunstan there was no sign, and no one had seen him since the exam. "I think I'm going to go read some," Rebecca had finally said. If Dex heard her, he made no indication. Rebecca was heading to the library when she saw Dunstan walking shakily out of the play yard. It had been a long day, and all Rebecca really wanted to do was sit in the library and find a book to snuggle up with. She'd been thinking about reading one of the numerous vampire romance novels they had. Not Twilight, but something Twilight adjacent. But something about Dunstan told her that he needed to talk to somebody. It wasn't psychic powers, that wasn't her bag, but it was a look that, if it had been worn by any one of her girlfriends, she would have seen her walking over with a protective arm and questions about what was going on. Dunstan was her friend now, and she wasn't likely to have any other friends in this place once it got what it wanted. She went out to the yard, finding him sitting by himself, and to her surprise he was drinking something from one of the special vending machines. The kindergarten had free food in the cafeteria and snacks in the TV room, but there was a special vending machine towards the back that would dispense alcohol. You had to scan your band, and you could only access it once a day, but she had seen some of the kids trying them out. Mostly it was the stress. She understood that some of them had never experienced anything more trying than elementary school, and now that they were responsible for something bigger than themselves, they were chafing under expectations. Dunstan really wasn't one to let it get to him, but it kind of looked like he was starting to crack a little. "You okay?" Dunstan jumped, like someone had caught him doing something he wasn't supposed to do. But when he looked up and saw that it was Rebecca, he breathed a sigh of relief. "Yeah, never better," he lied. Rebecca didn't have to guess. She could almost hear the lie in his voice. "We missed you at dinner tonight," she said, and took a seat beside him. Dunstan was looking longingly out at the setting sun as it went down behind the glass walls of the kindergarten play area. It was pretty clear that he was longing for freedom, but weren't they all? They all knew they had a job to do here, but who would ask such a thing of children? She supposed it was her own government that was asking, but it seemed unfair to expect kids to shoulder something like this. It would be one thing if they were in high school or maybe college, but these were elementary and middle school kids. She was very aware that she was in that count as well, but she started to think of herself as older than her 14 years. She'd been looking forward to going to high school before all of these dreams had started. But now, it seemed she might never get a chance to go. Dunstan was sipping from an airplane bottle of vodka, one of those little plastic ones that looked like glass, and he looked like dinner was the farthest thing from his mind. Didn't have any appetite. I can understand that, she said, as she looked at the sunset instead of him. Dunstan looked like he had seen any number of things that did not agree with him. He reminded her of the pictures in her textbook of soldiers that had returned from Vietnam. They always looked like they had seen the most god-awful thing imaginable, and somehow lived to tell the tale. Dunstan was drinking from the small bottle, but it was pretty clear that he wasn't seeing the sunset or anything else in the immediate vicinity. I doubt it, he said, and he sounded like he hoped it was true. No, really, I saw some things during the exam too, things that definitely made me afraid. They sat in silence for a moment, the sun sinking a little, as two of the younger kids came out to run off their dinner on the playground. They whooped and cheered as they raced around the plastic structure, laughing as they slid down the slides and went up the little rock wall so they could do it again. Rebecca wished that she could be that carefree again, caring about nothing so much as going up and down a plastic piece of play equipment. Like what? Huh? Rebecca asked, her mind wondering. Like what? Dunstan asked again. What did you see that was so bad? Rebecca thought he might be mocking her for a moment, but then she looked back and saw that he was serious. He wanted to know and maybe compare notes, and that scared her more than a little bit. It was really nothing too serious, but she wasn't quite sure she wanted to know what Dunstan had seen that made him look that way. Might be the sort of thing that would put her silly little dreams in perspective. It's silly, Rebecca said, and when Dunstan held out the bottle to her, she heard the liquid jostling inside of it. Take a sip of this. It makes serious things seem silly, and silly things seem very serious. Rebecca looked at the bottle, not trusting the liquid inside. Her mother had always insisted that drinking was for adults. She said kids who drink wound up in juvenile hall or in a ditch somewhere. Rebecca had been offered alcohol at a party last year, but she'd managed to turn it down fairly confidently. Now that she was sitting on a strange bench with this strange boy, she felt like it might be a little harder to say no. She took a sip, coughing as the acrid liquid made her throat tighten, and then she started talking again, and it seemed a lot easier. Well, it's kind of a floaty dream. I'm floating around while everyone is supposed to be asleep. I can see people and what they're doing, but what I'm focused on is this door that's over by the main area. It's locked, but I know that if I want to, I can get in there. The door doesn't open, but I go through it, and then I can see something. Something? I don't really know how to describe it. It's not really anything I've ever really been aware of, and it's not like anything I've ever seen. It's less like a person and more like a presence. It's this huge, noxious creature, this bug thing that just sort of is. I see it, and I start screaming, and then I wake up, and I'm not actually screaming. It's like I know I'm there, but it knows I can't do anything about it. It knows it can't do anything with me in my current situation. She didn't want to, but she took another sip from the bottle and winced. Dunstan had been right. The liquid seemed to make everything feel a lot better. Not a lot better, but better enough. It was easy to see why some adults fell into it and never came back out. It was kind of nice to not have to think about things for a while. Sounds like we might have seen the same thing then. Rebecca looked at him questioningly. She had expected him to tell her any number of things. She'd expected him to tell her how she had seen some little kid getting hit by a car or lured into a stranger's van. She'd expected him to tell her about adults hitting people and murderers creeping into bedrooms at night. She'd expected 1,000 different stories, but not to hear that he had seen the thing that scared her so much. If he'd seen it, then it could be real. And if it was real, then she might never sleep again. Do you mean to say that you've seen it too? Dunstan didn't say. He just sipped at his bottle of airplane vodka and kept looking at nothing. Dunstan, have you seen it? Dunstan kept right on not saying anything. And when he finished the bottle, he reached way back and launched it at the glass that separated them from the woods of wherever it was they were. Rebecca imagined the bottle sailing towards the window before it crashed into the glass and sent it shattering everywhere. She imagined how the glass would spiderweb and then be reduced to fractured obsolescence as that tiny bottle brought it all down. In a way, it would be a miracle like you read about in the Bible. It would give them hope, like the kids here could be that tiny bottle as they smashed apart the whole place. It hit the glass with a hollow thunk and fell to the rubber ground that surrounded the play area. I didn't see exactly what you saw, but I believe I saw it. What I saw was different. What I saw was something real and alive. What was it? Rebecca did not really want an answer, but she needed one. She needed to know what it was and that it could be stopped. She needed to know that it was flesh and blood, just like anything else, and if they all went down there, they could make it stop. They could kill it and make it so that no other kid needed to come here and be tormented and trained and eventually sent to see it, and she was beginning to think they might all be. Dunstan wanted to give her that reassurance, but Dunstan couldn't. It wasn't me that saw it. You have to understand that before I tell you what I saw, because I can't actually verify what it is that's there. What I saw was a memory, and memories can be funny things. What do you mean? Do you remember the first time you saw Santa Claus? Rebecca thought about it for a moment, eventually shaking her head. She realized that she couldn't remember it. Her mother had a picture of it, Rebecca red-faced and squalling, as she sat on the lap of some jolly man in a red outfit. But she realized that she couldn't remember having been there, or what it had been like. You can, but you just don't know how. That's the thing. Every memory you've ever had rests somewhere inside you. You don't remember because you don't want to. You have other things to remember, birthdays and reports and things like that. But if you tried, you could remember everything that you've ever experienced. The problem is you don't remember it right. You remember it the way you remember it. I'm going to venture a guess that you were afraid the first time you met Santa Claus. Is that pretty much right on the money? Rebecca shrugged, but nodded. If you could remember the first time you met Santa Claus, you'd probably remember him as a big red monster that you were afraid was going to eat you up. That wouldn't really be reality. It was just an overworked fat man in a red costume, but to you, at that time, it was real. Memories are malleable, and people often forget that, but some of what I see is the true sight. I see what they saw, but often I can make sense of it because I have experience and understanding. I tell you all this so that you'll understand that what I saw when Dr. Hammarskjöld took my hand may not actually be what lies beneath the building, but It's what he saw, and I believe him. Rebecca leaned back a little. Dr. Hammershoals, you saw something in his mind? Dunstan nodded morosely. I can usually block it out. I had to get pretty good at blocking things out, or I would have probably gone crazy a long time ago. The problem is, he grabbed my hand to help me up when I was already at a ragged place. I've been worn down by the exam, and I wasn't expecting him to touch me. There's usually defenses in place that I can put up to keep my mind from that sort of thing, but I didn't have time to put them up. I saw something. I saw a lot of things, but something I saw happened when he was very young. I guess it did. He might have just been short. It's hard to tell sometimes. I usually go by the height disparagement with adults, but the little doctor is, of course, little. Rebecca wasn't sure that she wanted to trust anything that he had seen inside that one's head, but she supposed that he couldn't lie to Dunstan through touch. This was Dunstan's ability, and if he said that he had seen it, then it must be true. She was still hesitant, but she pulled ahead as her curiosity got the better of her. What did you see? What did he show you? Dunstan looked around. The two kids had gone back inside after a few minutes of chasing each other across the play structure, and he leaned in to whisper in her ear. He was careful not to touch her, his defenses probably still a little ragged, and as he whispered what he had seen to her, Rebecca's eyes got very large. When he leaned away from her, she took a deep breath and told him what he had already guessed. We need to tell the others. Dunstan nodded and smiled. I was afraid you were going to say something like that. Dex made his way to the bathroom nearest the bunkhouse, about an hour after lights out. The message someone had left under his pillow was pretty clear, but Dex still wasn't sure that he understood it. Come to the South Hall boys' bathroom an hour after lights out. Dex hadn't been familiar with the handwriting. He knew Dunstan's handwriting. He remembered Masha's neat little script. But this handwriting had been a mystery. He guessed it might be a girl, maybe even Rebecca, but it was mostly an intuition. He supposed it would be good to see people who actually wanted his company. He had gone to bed extremely hurt, and maybe this would help him take his mind off what it was beginning to feel like a betrayal. About an hour before bedtime, Dex had called out to Ryan as he and his new friends headed for the game room. Ryan had stopped, looked back at him excitedly, and when Dex didn't follow them, Dick had said that they'd wait for him, and the three other red bands went in and left Ryan and Dex alone in the hallway. "What's up?" Ryan asked, as he raised his hand to give Dex a high five. Dex didn't return the gesture. He just looked at Ryan questioningly as he folded his arms against his chest. What's wrong with you?" Ryan asked, clearly not sure what was going on. "What's wrong with me? What's wrong with you? You were just gonna buddy up with these guys who made your life a living hell only a couple of days ago?" Ryan laughed it off as if Dex were being silly. "Oh, that. Dick said he was just razzing me. He said that's what friends do. They mess with each other. They said if you wanted to come hang out with us, you'd be more than welcome to. Awful generous of them, especially considering they hated our guts 2 days ago. Why would I come hang out with people who don't even like me? Not until they know what I can do, at least." Ryan had gotten an obstinate look about him, and he put his hands on his hips. "It isn't like that. Dick says they just wanted to make sure that I was tough enough to hang out with them. They aren't like what we thought. They just don't want to hang out with little shrimps. You can understand that. You're a big guy. I bet people want to hang out with you all the time because you're bigger than they are." "No," Dex said. "Most of the time when people want to hang out with me, it's because they want to be my friend. Most of the time when people spend months treating me like crap, I don't just turn around and go hang out with them when they start being nice to me. People like that will drop you in a heartbeat. I didn't need to go to foster care to tell you that. He's playing a game, and when you're no longer useful to his game, or you become an obstacle, he'll drop you again if he doesn't steamroll you first. Ryan had scrunched up his face and given Dex a look like he might be the stupidest person he had ever seen. You think I don't know that? You think I don't know that people are using me? You think I haven't spent most of my time being used by other people? I'm not an idiot, Dexter, but right now, my power has them scared. They're afraid of me. That's how I like it. Now that they know that I can make people's heads explode, they don't want to mess with me. I'd thought that maybe, once there was peace between both groups, you might decide you'd want to hang out too. See now that that was my mistake. So I guess you can go back to your other friends. I don't really need your protection anymore. He started to walk away, but Dex froze him with a word. I see. Ryan turned back around and jeered at him. Do you? I see that it was all bullshit. I see that you were never really my friend, especially when I protected you from your so-called friends. I don't need friends like that, Ryan. I've had enough people who just want to use me for my size, and I'm not in a big hurry to find another one. I thought better of you, thought you were different, but I see now that you're just like they are. You only hang around until something better comes along. Ryan turned slowly, and it took every ounce of Dex's control not to move as a small pressure formed right in the middle of his forehead. It wasn't a lot, a little more than a migraine headache, but Dex knew that with a little bit of a push, he'd have blood coming out of his nose and ears too. Ryan was doing that, doing it on purpose, and it told Dexter everything he needed to know. Careful, Dex, or you might get to see my powers up close and personal, like that Black Band kid got to see. Sounds like you're pretty proud of that. You proud that you killed someone? Does it make you feel like a big man, that you exploded his brain inside his skull? Does it make you feel good, knowing that he'll never get to go back to his parents again? Because if it does, then I'd say you're in good company with those guys. They're all too cowardly to actually kill anybody, but they're the kind of guys who would brag to people all the same. They're just like the cops that used to come around the area where me and my gang lived. They don't give a shit about anybody, but they're more than happy to kick you in the ribs, throw you against the wall, or maybe take your money and not put it into evidence. They're dirty. If you stick around with them long enough, you get to be dirty too. I thought better of you, Ryan. I respected you, and I like to think that you respected me. But I see I was mistaken. Ryan stared at him for a moment, and then turned to go as he threw one last barb over his shoulder. Yeah, I guess maybe you were. Dex stood in the hallway for a long time and stared at the door. It was hard to convince himself that he wasn't crying, and sometimes he almost believed it. But he still felt the tears on his cheek as he wiped them away and headed for the bunk room. As Dex lay down on his bed, listening to the kids as they got ready for bedtime, he realized this was the lowest he had ever felt. Masha was already asleep. Dunstan wasn't in his rack, and Rebecca and Gerald were essentially strangers. Dex felt like he had no one to talk to about this, and that made him feel even lower. He had rolled over to get comfy, deciding that maybe turning in early wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, and that was when he found the note. Now, he thought, as he pushed open the bathroom door, he was meeting someone in the restroom after getting a sketchy note under his pillow. Today just kept getting weirder. Rebecca was already there. So was Dunstan. And Dex was just about to ask why they had invited him to the toilet when Masha and Gerald walked in as well. "Good," Rebecca said. "You all came. I thought it best that it's just us. The others likely won't come back. I figured that out during dinner. We need to talk, and it's kind of important." The three recent arrivals looked around as if to ask what they needed to talk about, but Rebecca's opening gambit left them speechless. "We need to get the hell out of here before things go any further. There's something going on here that all of you should know. Something Dunstan and I recently discovered." "And what might that be?" Dex asked, flipping the lock in place as they all gathered around. Rebecca looked nervous but resolved. Dunstan looked like he might be sick. "Whatever reason we think we're here for, we're wrong. We aren't soldiers in some glorious army. We're the Soylent Green that's going into the masses." "What are you talking about?" asked Gerald. "We're here to serve, all right, but it's more like being served. We're here until we're ripe. We're here until we're at our most juiciest. Guys, we're dinner." Miss Gadsden was overseeing the art projects at Cashmere Elementary School. She'd only been the art teacher there for a few months, following Miss Wendy's sudden and surprise need to retire. Miss Gadsden couldn't really bemoan her loss too much. She had needed the job, and the extra $10 an hour that she got for being the art teacher instead of the art teacher's assistant. Besides, as far as classes went, the art class for a bunch of elementary school students wasn't too terribly difficult. You walked around, you complimented people's use of color, you answered a few questions that some of the more enthusiastic students had, and you generally stopped them from throwing paste or paint at each other. It was a couple of weeks before Christmas, and the kids were supposed to be doing Christmas pictures. This usually involved a lot of chunky-looking snowmen, a few Santa Clauses, maybe some lights on a lumpy-looking house, and perhaps a menorah or something else if the kids didn't celebrate Christmas. It all came down to a lot of green, a lot of red, more than enough gold, and a lot of colorful art to hang up on the hallway. She was walking around the table of Miss Honeywell's third-grade class, complimenting someone's snowflake or telling someone how good their Christmas tree looked, when she saw Wyatt bent over his art project and drawing like he might forget what it was. He wasn't drawing a Christmas tree or a Santa Claus or even a snowman. He seemed to be drawing the interior of a room from memory. His perspective was pretty good for a third grader, and it was pretty easy to see the thing that he was coloring in with his selection of crayons and what it was meant to be. She could see a nightstand with a digital clock, a lava lamp, and the usual bric-a-brac that little kids seem to like to collect. She could see a table with a laptop sitting on it, and a small pile of books and papers and things. She could see a bookshelf with all kinds of kids' books sitting on it. Wyatt had even drawn titles on the spines of some of them. And in the corner of the room was a small Christmas tree with colorful lights on it. He had even gone so far as to draw the glow-in-the-dark stars that wound their way across the ceiling of his bedroom, and she couldn't imagine that he had done all of this in 45 minutes. Something like this would have taken her hours to complete, but it was always astonishing what little kids could do with so little time. Those weren't the things that had stopped her in her tracks as she wandered by, though. What had stopped her was the horrifying creature that he was currently working on as it peeked into the window of the bedroom. The creature was unlike anything she had ever seen, and she honestly wished that Wyatt had used a little less detail on it. She didn't understand how he had got so much out of the Crayola crayons, but She could see individual hairs on the thing's face. It was like a goat person, its hair brown and matted. It had curling horns coming out of its head, and it seemed to be dressed in a kind of ragged Santa Claus coat, complete with downy white fringe, its eyes little more than hollow pits, and its teeth were pointed and straight as they protruded from its mouth. He had a pair of long white tusks that seemed to sprout from the corners of his lips, and a long red tongue that slid across the glass of the window. He had a single hand up to the glass, the fingers making a crude starfish, as Wyatt added the condensation that the warm hand had left on the window. If a kid with his talent made it to puberty, she shuddered to think what he might be able to do if he kept at it. Was that shudder from his potential, or was it from this grisly creature that was now looking in through the make-believe window? That's, very creative, Wyatt. What exactly is it? She had expected Wyatt to look guilty. She'd expected him to jump and try to cover the page as if he had done something wrong. But he just kept on drawing. It was like he needed to get it all out, or he might not get everything perfect. It reminded her of a friend that she'd had in college who had to throw up every bit of alcohol she had drunk before she could pass out. She had to get it all up, or else it would stick with her forever. That's what this picture was. It was Wyatt getting all of it out so that maybe, just maybe, it could be forgotten. That's the monster that looks in my window. He said it as if it was the simplest thing in the world, but it made Miss Gladstone all the more curious. Does the monster come every night to look in your room? No, Wyatt said, looking at the picture and then picking up the black crayon so he could add something to the corner of the eye. He only started last week. He's been coming every night since, though. I don't know if he knows I can see him, but he appears late at night and just watches me. Miss Gladstone wanted to laugh and chalk it all up to the weird things that kids often say, but this seemed different somehow. This seemed like it was a little more than a child's overactive imagination. It was so detailed that it was hard for her to discredit it or just think of it as some bit of imaginary nonsense. If this thing had come and looked into her window every night, Miss Gladstone thought that she might lose her mind. What's more, she thought she knew what the creature was. Hadn't her grandmother warned her that if she were a bad girl, this creature would come and get her during Christmas time? As she looked at the picture, she could hear her grandmother's thick Germanic accent as she told her what would happen if she was bad. Santa Claus does not come for bad children. No, he'll send one of his helpers. He'll send his worst helper to come and punish you for being a naughty little girl. He'll beat you with switches, and then he'll put you in his basket and take you away forever. It had scared her as a child, but now all she could wonder was why you would tell something like that to a child in the first place. She would have never told her own children that. She would have never told them something that cruel, and it would have likely kept them awake for weeks if she had. When their teacher came back to get the class, Mrs. Gladstone asked if she could keep Wyatt for just a little while longer so he could finish his art project. Miss Honeywell said that that would be fine, just to bring him back to class when they were done. Mrs. Gladstone said that they wouldn't be long, and as the teacher left with the rest of the students, she pulled up a chair on the other side of the art table and watched Wyatt work. He had stopped coloring now, seeming to look at the picture as if wondering what he could add to it. She wondered, what could he add? And found that she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Wyatt? He didn't look up, just kept looking at the picture. Wyatt? He looked up then, seeming to realize that she was there at all. He looked concerned, but not overly so. She supposed that a monster wasn't really all that much to worry about for a child. They saw monsters everywhere, under the bed or in the closet, and at least this one was outside, or maybe it couldn't get to him. But if her grandmother was to be believed, then a window or a door certainly wouldn't stop him. How many nights has this monster come to your window? Wyatt thought about it and then held up 6 fingers. Do you know what it is? Wyatt shook his head. Then he slid the picture to her as if asking her to take it away. You don't have to hang it in the hallway, but I was hoping that if I drew the monster, then he might go away. Maybe if he knows that I saw him, he'll leave me alone. I don't think he's ready to hurt anyone yet. I think right now, he's just watching. Wyatt told her he'd like to go back to class then, and she nodded and gave him a pass and told him to go straight to Miss Honeywell's room. Miss Gladstone sat there for the rest of her free period and looked at that picture, hoping that it had all been a dream and Wyatt was wrong about what he had seen. She had spent her entire childhood being afraid of this creature, and she didn't want it anywhere near her family or her town. As he finished, all of them stood around in silence. It was hard to believe, but Dex supposed that a school full of gifted children that didn't exist and inside some kind of comic book was also pretty hard to believe. If you had told anyone about the kindergarten, they would have scoffed and told you you'd been watching too much conspiracy theory drivel. The kindergarten sounded like something you heard about on one of those talk shows that you sometimes heard inside rundown stores and gas stations. It was strictly stuff you heard on Alex Jones or Joe Rogan. It was entertaining, but there was no way it could be real. You called it the Blacksite, Masha said inquiringly. Why did you do that? Because that's what Dr. Hammarskjöld called it in his memories. It's always the Blacksite to him. I remember hearing about Blacksites on some program Dad used to watch, Gerald said suddenly. They're government sites, outside laws and rules. It's where they're supposed to hide all that alien tech they find, where they conduct psychic research, where they keep weird creatures and strange entities for the good of the country. It always sounded like so much bullcrap while my old man was talking about it, but I suppose now that I'm inside one, maybe it seems a little more believable. Believable? Masha said, sounding dismissive. You don't actually think any of this is true, do you? Gerald cocked an eyebrow. Why wouldn't it be? Doesn't seem fake to me, does it to you? Masha scoffed, a sound that was weird, coming from someone with such a pinched little nose. She got a look on her face like a professor talking to a slow pupil. It was a look that was much too old for her, but it didn't stop her from taking it for a test run. This might be a government site, but surely they haven't collected all of us here to feed us to some monster. That's a stretch, and you know it. If this is a government site, it's just as likely that they're using it for research. Maybe they're doing psychic research or trying to build some kind of super soldier. Maybe they're training us to be spies or weapons or something. That doesn't sound scary to me. Just sounds like they're trying to prepare us for something that we can do once we grow up. Well, Rebecca said, If they're trying to train us to be secret agents or some kind of X-Men, then isn't it just as likely that they're trying to fatten us up for some kind of monster? If we can buy one, then why is the other one so hard to believe? Masha didn't have an answer for that, but she shook her head and headed for the door. This has all been very entertaining, but I'm going to bed. We have class tomorrow, and I, for one, want to be well rested so I can attend. If all of you want to go play make-believe, then be my guest. Masha, Dex said, but the little girl was already on the way out the door. She twirled the lock open and made her way out into the hall as she let it close behind her much too loudly. If whoever was watching the cameras cared that a little girl, who was barely old enough for elementary school, had just strolled out of the boys' bathroom, then they kept it to themselves. No minders came running down the hall. No alarms were raised in the slightest. In the kindergarten, it appeared that so long as the charges kept living, it didn't much matter what they got up to. Rebecca turned back to Gerald and Dex as if to ask what they thought of all this. "Well?" she asked, when neither of them said anything. "Why would they do this?" Dex asked. "I mean, they went to all the trouble of kidnapping us, so why kill us? Don't we rate some kind of price for all this?" "You don't get it," Gerald said. "Our value is this. It's like grocery shopping. They know this thing is going to want to eat. They know it, and they accept it. Security Chief Ridley told Dr. Hammarskjöld that this is what happens to all graduates. That tells me that whatever misgivings they have about sacrificing kids to this thing have long ago been set aside. They know what they're doing, and even if they don't like it, they know there's no other way." Dex wanted to argue, to tell them that no one sacrificed kids or sucked out all the special stuff inside them, but it just wouldn't hunt. The truth was, who really knew what the government did half the time? They always seemed to be getting up to something, and hadn't Dex been part of that system for a while? Hadn't he been shuffled around like a burden until they finally just lost track of him? Him and about 7 or 8 other kids. They had simply been lost, like they were nothing more important than a bag of paper clips or a sack of garbage. Dex could believe that the government would take a bunch of special kids and scoop out the things that made them special. After all, most of the time the government didn't care what happened to kids, as long as people kept paying money and things kept getting done. "I bet it's behind the door," Gerald said all of a sudden. "What door?" Rebecca asked. "When I was following Dr. Hammarskjöld to exams, we passed a door that was special somehow. It had a red string going towards it, and when I asked Dr. Hammarskjöld about it, he tried to tell me that it wasn't important and that we needed to get going. I bet you anything that whatever this creature is, it's behind that door." Dex wished that he could simply take things at face value as Gerald did. Maybe seeing those strings let him just believe whatever he was told. Why not? The guy had a GPS in his head, and he knew exactly where he was going. Red strings meant death, orange strings meant danger, blue strings meant you got an ice cream sandwich. So why would you even think to question what the big red monster down in the basement would do? Why, he'd eat you up, of course, once you graduated. It made all the sense in the world to someone like that. "So what do we do?" Dexter asked, wanting to get to the bottom of this. "Only one thing to do about it," Gerald whispered. "We have to escape." Dex shook his head. "Yeah? Should we get some McDonald's on our way out, too? That seems easier said than done." Gerald shrugged. "It's the only thing for it. We have to get out of here before we get our powers or our essence or whatever sucked out." Dex shook his head. "Shit, I guess you're right. But how are we going to do it?" Rebecca shrugged. I figure between the 5 of us, we can figure something out. Dex shook his head again. You mean between the 4 of us? Sounds like Masha may not be coming back. That made Dex sadder than he would have admitted. He liked the little girl. She was more like a kid sister to him than anything, and he had hoped that she would come around. Perhaps she, like Ryan, was feeling her power and had decided it was better to be feared than loved. He didn't know, but he thought it was possible that she would come around again before the end. He hoped so. He felt as if any of them were going to graduate, it would be her. And that would be very bad, given what they had just learned. All right, well, we'll start tomorrow. We have to find some way to make it out of this place, one way or another. We have to find some way to make it out of this place in the next 2 months, Dunstan pointed out, because in 2 months, we'll be taking our finals. After that, some of us will graduate. Most of us will wash out. A few of us may even die. But those who graduate will be seen no more. That gave them all something to think about as they left the bathroom and went their separate ways. And it followed them to bed and nestled in their dreams as well. You wanted to see me, sir? Security Chief Ridley didn't look away from the monitors as he called Cutter in. He was watching 4 of the kiddos, 1 red band and 3 green bands, and Cutter was uncomfortable as he noticed that one of them was Dex. The kid had been a little lacking in class today, but that was understandable when you were the odd man out. Cutter doubted that that's what Ridley wanted to talk about, however, and it took the security chief a few minutes to answer him as he watched the 4 in the media room. These 4 are up to something. Cutter waited for him to elaborate, and when he didn't, Cutter decided to bite. Whatever do you mean, sir? I mean that they've been seen in the restroom the other night. And by the way, the little girl, the blue band prodigy, stormed out. I'd guess it didn't go well. Any idea what they were meeting about? The older girl, Cutter thought, was named Rebecca, and she was old enough to have more than schoolwork on her mind. But the kid that he and Gladdy had gone to get, the brat with the I'm better than you look, wasn't long out of diapers. Girls usually met boys in the bathroom for liaisons that had nothing to do with French homework. But if Masha had tagged along for that, then she was more advanced than he thought. Ridley gave him a sour look. Get your mind out of the gutter, Cutter. I don't think the girl was interested in a menage a trois. They know the bathroom is one of the few places we don't have cameras, so it would make an excellent place for secret meetings. Why don't we? Cutter asked, and when Ridley gave him a questioning look, he added, I have cameras in the bathrooms, I mean. Suppose some kid decides to go hang himself in a stall. It might be nice to stop him. Decorum, mostly. It's considered bad manners to spy on people in the bathroom. Since when have you been worried about manners? Cutter asked with a grin. Ridley snorted and hit a button on the remote. He pulled up video of the restroom in question, and Cutter could see all 5 of them hanging out by the sinks and talking. He supposed they had been a little young for hanky-panky, but they didn't even appear to be getting drunk or having a smoke, activities young Cutter was usually more familiar with when in the bathroom at that age. These in the staff bathrooms, too? Cutter asked. Ridley didn't respond. There's no sound, he said, as Cutter looked at their silent lips questioningly. The text thought that might be enough decorum, I suppose. I've never been much for lip reading, but it looks like a powwow of some sort or another. For what, though? Cutter asked, leaning forward to try and make sense of it. That is what I'd like to know. Keep an eye on them, especially the big boy, Dexter. You 2 have gotten quite chummy as of late, and he might let something slip if we're lucky. I doubt it, Cutter said, shaking his head as his eyes started to hurt. The kid plays it close to the vest. Probably had to after living on the street for so long. Will he graduate? Cutter shook his head. Pure washout, but he'll likely sign on if we ask. He's old enough that we could send him to training for a year or so, and he'd make a good snatcher. 16 or 17-year-olds usually put kids at ease before we snap them up. It's a good cover. Ridley was nodding, and the smile that stretched his face was downright predatory. See if he can be enticed. Maybe we can flip him. It's probably just kids playing games, but I don't like the look on this one's face, he said, pointing to Dunstan. Kid looks like he's been in the trenches, Cutter said, grinning a little. He's seen something, and if he's telling them about it, then it could be bad enough to make them try to escape or start a coup. That many kids with powers turning against us could be bad for business. And the scared kid is on our graduation list, if Hammershoal is to be believed. Cutter snorted. If it's the one who keeps finding people, then he's probably right. That kid has some chops. I want those chops, and I want them graduated. Whatever this is, I want it squashed. Understood? Crystal, boss, Cutter said with a jackleg salute before heading for the door. And Cutter, Ridley said, bringing the man up short, I trust you'll keep this knowledge about the cameras to yourself. What cameras? Cutter asked, before heading out into the site again. If there was one thing that Cutter was good at, it was keeping his mouth shut. I checked the doors, and everything seems to be locked up tight in the places we aren't supposed to be. They'd all decided to meet in the media room. Dex, Rebecca, Dunstan, and Gerald. Masha was still giving them the silent treatment, but Dexter was used to that after this morning's class. The Red Band group had never been what you would call friendly, but Dexter had usually been able to talk to Ryan, and that made it okay. Now, Ryan was part of Dick's little gang, and they did everything together, while Dex did most everything by himself. If Cutter had noticed, then he didn't make any comment on it. Cutter was a teacher, after all, and it probably wasn't his place to comment on the actions of students, as long as they weren't killing each other. Not like he could do anything if we did decide to kill each other, Dex thought. If Dick and his little gang decided they wanted to jump Dex, there wouldn't be a damn thing the burly ex-Navy man could do about it. He wasn't supposed to know that Cutter had been in the service, but when his uniform had hiked up a little higher than usual, and Dex had seen the Semper Fi tattoo across his ribs, he had kept it to himself. He would file that away for later consumption, because you just never knew what you might need to know around here. It's the same with the door near the Blue Band class, Dunstan said. They're all locked, or they've got those keycard readers that all the teachers seem to use. I haven't seen any weird strings either, Gerald informed them. Well, no weirder than usual. Gerald only really looked for blue and red strings, and lately they had been everywhere. The red strings hung around like bad omens, and they seemed to run under most of the doors. The blue strings ran pretty consistently, but the damnedest thing was that a blue and a red string ran under the door that he would go through if he was unlucky enough to graduate. Dunstan had told them what was on the other side, and Gerald just couldn't understand why a blue string would be present there. Maybe it was to show him that all he had to look forward to was death, but didn't everyone? Death was just something that happened, and it was something that you better get right with if you wanted to keep your mind intact. Well, I'm not sure how else we would manage it. We have a ragtag collection of powers, and I'm not sure any of them would be particularly suited to escape, Rebecca said as she put her chin in both her hands. For someone who had devised the need to escape, Rebecca had become very moody with the prospect of it. It seemed like, since she couldn't come up with a way to get out, then one must not exist. It was strange to see her so downtrodden, and none of them seemed to like it as they tried to devise the best way to get out of here. I suppose we could just bomb our exams, Dunstan said hopefully. Rebecca gave him a hard look before asking, Are you in that big a hurry to lose your gifts? Besides, who's to say that you get to go back to the real world if you wash out? I don't see a lot of these guys going back to the real world to live a normal and fulfilled life. Most of them seem to wind up back here again. Look, I don't know about you, but my gift hasn't exactly been a picnic. I would honestly kind of like not being able to see things every time I pick up a fork or a pen. It's kind of a pain in the ass when you get right down to it. I don't know, Gerald piped up. Now that I know the strings exist, I think if I couldn't see them, it'd drive me crazy. I don't know, Dex said. I think if I lost my ability to push things, I might be a little better suited for the real world anyway. Doesn't really matter what exactly is waiting for us out there. You think they're going to print us out a high school diploma when they ship us out? Do you think they're going to give us a new social security card or a new bank account? As far as the real world is concerned, we're probably already dead. I know nobody was looking for me. And Dunstan, you're in the system, so I doubt anybody's looking for you too hard after the first couple of months. You two have families, but Gerald, you've been pretty clear on the fact that your home life is anything but stable. For once, Gerald didn't have anything to say about that. Let's face it, if we get out of here, it's just to disappear until somebody finds us. Nothing is waiting for us out there, and we might as well wrap our heads around that. They were silent for a minute after that revelation. And when Rebecca spoke, it made Dex jump. Honestly, it's the principle of the thing. These wackos think they can just abduct us and take our powers and then push us out of the nest again? I don't think so. She probably meant it to sound tough or invigorating, but it really just sounded like a scared little girl playing make-believe to the rest of them. So, if we can't get through the door, then what are our options? Seems as if there's only two, Rebecca said. Since we can't get out on our own, we're going to need help. That means we either have to get a message to somebody on the outside, or we have to get somebody in here to help us. Good plan, Dexter said, except how are we going to get a message to the outside if we can't get out? I've been thinking about that, Rebecca said, as she picked up her end with a little more confidence. They have computers in the media room. I know there are games on them. Some of them are even online games. I've seen some of the other kids checking out their social media, too. Maybe there's a way that we can get a message out of here to somebody else. I'm sure that they have that end buttoned up nicely, Gerald said. You can't expect a government facility like this not to be monitoring our outgoing and incoming messages. If those kids are checking their emails, then I guarantee they're not talking to anybody. They're just checking pre-existing sites. I watched a couple of YouTube videos the other night, and I noticed that the comment section was turned off on both of them. These are channels that I've watched for years, people who are relying on comments for interaction, and there's no way they're going to turn off their comment section on a video with over 1 million views. That tells me that whatever's going on here, they have at least that much control. Rebecca rolled her eyes. You guys are thinking too linearly. There's a collection of weird powers around here. Are you going to tell me that somebody can't mess with electrical signals? There has to be one person around here who can maybe somehow alter the passage of subtitles or maybe find a workaround for the firewall that blocks our emails. We just have to find them. As to your point, Dex put in as he rode her over, what adult that works for the kindergarten is going to help us? Seems like most of them have drank the Kool-Aid for so long that they don't piss without filing reports. Dunstan had been silent since Rebecca put the idea forward, but he looked up now and said, there might be one. All of them turned to look at him, questions bleeding through their stares. Which one? I know you're not talking about going to Dr. Hammarskjöld. The doc's all right most of the time, but he's deep in the Blacksite's pocket when it's all said and done. He may want to help us, but he doesn't want to get burned himself to do it. Not the little doctor, somebody else. I think she might help us if I asked her. I get the feeling that she really wants to make amends, and I think we can trick her into helping us get out. Who are you talking about? Rebecca asked. Dunstan sighed. My mother. Dex and Dunstan were sitting on the playground a couple of days after the meeting in the media room. It had been decided that Gerald would go and talk to the other Green Band kids and see if any of them had a talent for electrical work. Rebecca would talk to some of the Blue Band kids. that she knew, though there was every possibility that Masha had already told them what was going on, and they wouldn't help. Dex didn't think that was the case, though. Most of the kids in the Blue Band class seemed like they were afraid of Masha these days. The rumor was that she had burnt an instructor's brain out during her midterm, and a lot of the kids were kind of afraid of her. That tracked. None of them had been around to eat with her since midterms, and Masha hadn't been around to eat with them since their argument in the bathroom. She ate by herself at a corner table, and the look on her face wasn't one of hurt, but of superiority. If the students were scared, though, then the teachers were ecstatic. They had begun preparing for graduation, and most of them were giving her private sessions so that she would be ready for whatever came next. Dunstan had been tasked with talking to his mother, one of the snatchers who had been around during the midterms. Dex knew it was a sore subject, but it might be important. Dunstan only knew about his mother because of a random encounter, and he could tell that the boy was conflicted about it. "So, any luck finding your mom?" Dunstan made a face like someone had fed him a lemon. "Don't call her that," Dunstan said in a tone that was different from his usual joking manner. "If she wanted to be my mom, she should have stuck around." "If you expect me to say I don't have any clue what you're talking about, then you're wrong. Don't forget, my own mom left me on the steps of the police station, and I was in the system until I was about 10. I could say the same, but my mom's not in a position to help us out of this hole." Dex had been tasked with trying to find alternative ways out that they hadn't thought of. He honestly was a little jealous of Dunstan because his job seemed pretty impossible. He had checked the glass walls that went around the playground, but he suspected they were all shatterproof, and he wouldn't be getting through them without anything less than a car. He had taken to checking the ventilation ducts, but the one time he had managed to get one of them off, all he had found was an opening barely big enough for a toddler. The kindergarten was fresh out of toddlers this semester, it seemed, so Dex had chalked that up as a failure. He had started thinking about the plumbing system, but it was the same problem. Without tools, he just couldn't get into the guts of anything. The tools were not something the kids had access to. The only tools they had were the ones in their mind, and Dex still couldn't produce a brain blast strong enough to take a door off its hinges, let alone blow a hole in the plumbing system. Abilities did pretty well on flesh and blood people, but against solid objects, they were hit or miss. "I guess you might have some idea of what I'm feeling," Dunstan said as he took a sip of the soda that he had gotten from the cafeteria. "But I feel like if she wanted to be my mom, then she had her chance. I can't imagine what I would do if my mom suddenly popped up out of nowhere," Dex confided. "I always just assumed she was some drug addict or maybe a homeless person or something. There's a lot of homelessness in the city where I live, but I wish that she had at least tried to keep the family together. Family doesn't seem to mean much when you're in the system. All of us wanted it, but few of us ever seemed to get a good one. I'd been through 6 foster homes before I realized that. Every time I got a new one, I would think to myself that this would be my last stop. I would find some Daddy Warbucks type or some nice lady who would love me for who I was, like in that Matilda movie. But it was always just people wanting a bit of extra cash from the government. People who already had way too many kids, too many to give a shit about one more. I can pretty well tell you that the group home wasn't a lot better," Dunstan said. "I've been in one since I was old enough for school, and it's a lot like the Lord of the Flies. Everything's about squabbles and territory, and if you have something that's actually yours, you hang on to it with both hands. People never wanted me because they thought I was weird, or they thought I wasn't a good fit. I went to a couple of foster homes, and I got adopted once, but it all fell apart. The only people that seemed to want me were weirdos, and after a while, I was just afraid to try again." "Well," Dex said with a grin as he bumped his fist against the boy's shoulder, "I guess you can be part of this family. We're not going to do anything weird to you unless that's what you're into." Dunstan smiled, but it was shallow. Oh boy, I finally get a real family for at least the next 2 months. I'm the luckiest boy around. Dex laughed, glad to see a little bit of the boy's joking nature was left. We'll find a way out. Don't worry about it. Pretty soon we'll all be back in the real world, just trying to survive until we're old enough to get swallowed by jobs and bills and the usual BS. If that's all that's waiting for us, I guess maybe it's a better thing if the monster eats us up. Dex shook his head as he looked at the sun setting behind the windows. Dunstan might not be wrong on that account. Electronics? Rebecca and Gerald were talking to some of the kids in the Green Band group. They knew what all of them could do, but some of them had started developing new stuff, just like Rebecca had. While some of them had started out as precogs and trackers, a few of them had developed other abilities. They could see visions of the future, they had become automatic writers, or they could even move things with their mind just a little bit. It wasn't perfect, but it made them believe that spending time around so many other gifted students might be increasing their own power set. Yeah, Rebecca said, as she looked around for minders. We're trying to play a prank on some of the minders, and we're looking for anybody that might be able to manipulate electronics. Like, manipulate them how? The kid from Texas said, the one with the accent that was real twangy. Well, we'd like to see if we can make the TV in the media center display weird messages or emergency alerts. Something that'd give them a start, but it wouldn't hurt them or anything. Any of you guys able to do anything like that? All of them shook their heads, and Rebecca told them to keep the discussion to themselves or they'd ruin the joke. They all said they would, a couple of them making zipping motions over their lips, and Rebecca and Gerald moved away towards the library. I told you it was probably going to be a dead end. I think the Blue Band group is going to be our best hope for somebody with that sort of power set. I know, Rebecca said, but we have to exhaust all our options, and we know the kids in the Green Band class a little better than we do the others. We spend a lot of time with them at the very least, and sometimes that makes them a little more willing to talk to you. She could see Gerald looking at the ground, probably looking for strings, and she suddenly was very curious about what he might be seeing. How do you know if a blue string is going to take you to something good or something bad? Gerald looked up, a little bit shocked that she would ask, and when he shrugged, it didn't give them a lot of hope. I don't. I mean, ultimately, the final destination for me is the same as it is for you. I'm gonna die. Everybody's gonna die, but I kind of interpret the blue string as another notch in my journey. If I follow the blue strings, then I'll come to some kind of end that's supposed to happen. They've never led me into danger before, but they have led me into some uncomfortable situations, and I suppose that's to be expected. I don't know, this thing isn't a science or anything. I've always followed the blue strings as carefully as I can. I suppose I will until I can't follow them anymore. Rebecca nodded, fairly satisfied with the answer. Have you seen any strings pointing us towards a way to escape? Gerald shook his head. Strange part is, the blue string is pointing me towards the creature in that room. What? Rebecca asked, shocked. Yeah, isn't that weird? It's as if whatever's in there is my destiny, and it's trying to direct me towards it. So, like, the string is trying to get you eaten? Gerald shrugged. I don't know, but I guess I'll find out eventually. Rebecca sighed and shook her head. She guessed all of them would find out eventually. I have to say, Masha, your scores lately have been tremendous. I've already put your name forward to Security Chief Ridley, and I think you'll be a shoo-in for graduation. Miss Cashmere had asked her to stay after class so that they could discuss her progress. Masha knew that she was progressing well. Miss Cashmere certainly told her often, but it made her smile to realize that an adult thought so highly of her. Adults had been telling her that she was special most of her life, either that she was smart or that she was mature, but it always made her feel nice to hear it. Mature girls got certain privileges that babies and whiners didn't. Her mother had always told her so, and Masha had tried her best to be adult and proper most of her life. It was a little different now that she had superpowers, and being mature and advanced meant invading people's minds and implanting thoughts, but she supposed it was just part of growing up. Thank you, Miss Cashmere. I really appreciate that. I appreciate having a student like you, Miss Cashmere said with a smile. We usually have someone from the Blue Band program graduate, but they usually also make the strongest graduates. The kindergarten always likes to see a talented Blue Band student because it means their power is going to be something spectacular. Masha's enthusiasm was curbed a little when she remembered what Dunstan had said. Scratch that, what Dunstan had made up. Dunstan was just jealous that he probably wasn't going to graduate. Masha knew that he had a lot of power, but the little doctor had probably told him that his talent wasn't going to get him to graduation, and he got jealous of Masha and her clearly superior powers. Still, that didn't stop Masha from being a little nervous about what awaited her at graduation. She didn't honestly think there was a monster in the basement that was going to eat her power, but when you're a kid and monsters are everywhere, it's a little harder to convince yourself that something is made up. Even if there was no monster, what would happen to Masha once she graduated? If she graduated in 2 months. She'd be just one more talented 7-year-old, and she supposed that was something, but what did it get her? Miss Cashmere, can I ask you a question? Of course, dear, you can ask me anything. Miss Cashmere had a smile that was threatening to cut the top of her head off, and Masha wondered if it would still be there once she voiced her concern. What happens after graduation? Miss Cashmere looked a little taken aback, as though no one had ever asked her that before, but her smile was firmly back in place a minute later, and she soldiered on as she always had. What do you mean? You graduate, and then you move on to what comes next. Yes, but what is that? What comes next? Do I go to another school or another program? Or, Masha, you're a very bright girl, but let's focus on the here and now. Don't get hung up on what comes after, because it won't be important until you get there. You're a very talented little girl, and what you need is focus. Your life is going to be very different from your peers, and that's going to require you to be goal-oriented. People with powers often have to live their lives as if they're running through a checklist. The first check mark came when you were accepted into kindergarten. The second check mark came when you passed your midterms. The next check mark will come when you pass your finals and graduate. Until you've checked off that next box, the future won't matter. Just concentrate on graduating from the kindergarten, and then you can see what comes after. Masha had never thought of it like that, but she supposed it made a lot of sense. Special people had to have their priorities straight, and if you lost track of that, then you could lose track of your powers. Masha wanted to graduate. She wanted to move on to whatever came next, but what she didn't need was to get distracted and potentially mess up her final exam. Something else she was a little nervous about was the other thing that she needed to discuss with Miss Cashmere. Miss Cashmere, I need to tell you something. Of course. What is it, my dear? Masha worried at her bottom lip, not sure that it was something that she should say, but feeling that her teacher would be excited about it nonetheless. Well, I had something happen in the media room the other day. Something that had never happened to me before. Miss Cashmere started to ask her what she was talking about, but instead, Masha decided to show her. She pointed a finger at the woman's laptop, which was setting by her elbow, and suddenly, the computer rose off the desk and began to take itself apart. The pieces floated in a sphere of energy, moving around like DNA in a helix strand. Then, almost on their own volition, they began to reassemble themselves into the laptop that had been there a moment before. The whole operation took about a minute, but Miss Cashmere looked like she might have just witnessed a miracle. As the laptop set itself down on the desk, Miss Cashmere just stared at it before Masha pointed a finger and asked her to turn it on. She reached out with a shaky finger, and when the laptop booted up as if nothing at all had happened to it, the woman nearly squealed with delight. "Masha, this is amazing!" Masha blushed. "Oh, it's nothing. I'm sure lots of people can do it. I was worried because it's a little different than what I do now. I know that moving things is something that the red bands do, and things that go on in the mind are something that the blue bands do, but it seems that I can do both." "It would seem so," Miss Cashmere said. She was barely listening to the girl anymore. All she could see was the potential for advancement. Cashmere had found something spectacular, something that rarely ever happened in this day and age. Most of the kids they brought in could barely manifest one ability, let alone two different ones. Most of her blue band students were uninspired, able to manipulate feelings or maybe implant a thought here or there. The really talented ones might be able to fog over someone's mind so they could sneak past them, or implant suggestions so that they could get them to do things, but this had been the first class where everyone could implant and receive mental stimuli. Miss Cashmere had already thought this was one of the more advanced classes that she'd ever taught, and was hoping that most of them would pass their final graduation. A big graduation class looked good for whoever was teaching it, and Security Chief Ridley had been very generous with the bonuses for graduating students in the past. In the last 2 decades, Miss Cashmere had received several such bonuses, and was looking forward to telling him about what she had discovered in the young girl. "So, yeah, I suppose it's pretty amazing," Masha was saying, and Miss Cashmere shook her head as she tried to come back to reality. "Amazing? My girl, it's unheard of. I don't think I've ever seen a student who could manifest the way you do. You might be a 1 in a million graduate, and I'm so glad to be the one who gets to teach you. Do you have any other abilities? Anything else that you've discovered?" Well, I can lift things with my mind a little bit. That's kind of how I found out that I could do the thing with the computer. I was trying to lift one of the little speakers in the media center, trying to work it out a little bit, and then suddenly I realized that I could use this ability to take it apart and put it back together. "And how did you realize that?" Masha shrugged. I just knew. It wasn't as if it was anything I learned. My brain just told me I could do it. So I did. The teacher was making mental notes about Masha's journey, wanting something to take to Security Chief Ridley when she told him about this. "That's astonishing. For now, let's keep this our little secret, though. Don't go showing anybody what you can do, or they might get jealous. It might also confuse the other minders and make them put you in a different class. I want to see how far your mind powers can expand before graduation. But I'm interested in seeing what you can do with these abilities as well." Masha smiled, leaning forward to hug the woman suddenly, which surprised both of them. "I'm fortunate to have you here to look after me, Miss Cashmere. I hope I can make you proud by graduating." She left after that, heading out of the classroom towards whatever her afternoon entailed, leaving the teacher feeling slightly surprised and more than a little guilty. "And why the hell would I help you, kid?" Dunstan felt the piece of paper shake in his hand. This wasn't the first minder that he had asked. It wasn't even the 10th, but the answer always seemed to be the same. There was some kind of web of silence surrounding these sorts of things, and he didn't think he'd be allowed to break through. She helped during my exam. I was just hoping to talk to her for a minute. I just wanted to talk, that's all. She was nice, and I was hoping maybe we could talk again. All you have to do is hand her a note. If she isn't interested, then I guess she'll tell me to buzz off. The minder scoffed and shook his head. Yeah, right. Why would she have any interest in a punk like you? Dunstan had been asking around for a few days about the brown-haired woman who'd come in to help with the green bands during exams. That was all he knew about her, the color of her hair, and the way she looked at the kids. That seemed extremely wrong somehow. You should know more about your mother than just the color of her hair. There should be some kind of law against not even being able to pick your mom out of a lineup, but apparently that was pretty normal in this situation. You don't even have to do anything. All you have to do is hand her a note. Like I said, if she doesn't want to talk, then she'll tell me to get lost. I just need someone to give it to her. If you're too much of a chicken to do it, then... The minder bristled, and Dunstan could tell that he'd struck a nerve. Clearly the man did not like having his courage called into question. You want to watch your tone, kid. I've put guys on the ground for offhanded comments like that. I don't really like your face, so I'm going to tell you to take a hike. But Dunstan knew he'd already lost. Beat it, kid, before I report you to Security Chief Ridley for whatever this is. Dunstan sighed and put the note in his pocket as he took his leave. At this rate, he didn't know how he was going to find his mother. He knew this was nothing more than a part of Rebecca's escape attempt, but the longer he looked, the more it changed in his mind. It was hard, knowing that she was so close and having no way to do anything about it. Some nights he would lay awake and think about it, just wondering if maybe she was thinking about him as well. He didn't figure she was, but you never knew. Perhaps she was looking for him just as hard as he was looking for her. Dunstan decided to go to the cafeteria, hoping that maybe he'd get lucky and she'd be there somewhere. His hopes weren't high. He knew that most of the extra staff had already gone home, or to whatever quantified as home for them. Most of them likely would go back out on the road, looking for kids to bring into this place, or just trying to figure out what their next move was going to be. Dunstan wondered how something like that might weigh on him, and then decided that it might be best not to think about it. He might one day have to shoulder that burden, and he wasn't really in a big hurry to find out about it. What will it be, kid? Are you getting the chicken, or are you getting the pasta? Dunstan shook himself. He'd been lost in thought and forgot where he was for a moment. I was wondering if you could help me with something. I'm looking for someone, and I'm hoping that maybe you... There were kids pushing trays behind him, and Dunstan could already feel that this was a bad idea. Look, kid, I just served the food. I don't actually know anybody. Now, do you want the chicken, or do you want the pasta? Some of the kids were looking at Dunstan with impatience, and he saw Ryan say something to Dick as the two chuckled behind their hands. It's a lady, one of the ladies that goes to get the kids. We met during the exam, and I was hoping to find her again. You wouldn't know anything about where the people go when they take the kids back here, after exams or anything. She's got brown hair, and chicken or pasta, Poindexter, move it along, one of Dick's cohorts said, and the line laughed nastily. I told you, kid, I don't know anybody, and even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. Now, do you want the pasta, do you want the chicken, or do you want to go hungry? Dunstan told him that he'd have the pasta, and the man in the apron put the plate on his tray a little harder than he strictly needed to. He looked at Dunstan as if to say, will that be all? And Dunstan took his food and went to find an empty table. As he sat down and began to pick at his food, he suddenly doubted that he would ever find his mother. It seemed as if no matter what he did, it was never going to get him any closer to what he was looking for. Perhaps it would always be a mystery, just something that he wasn't supposed to find out. None of it made him feel any better, but very little these days made him feel any better. "Any luck?" came a voice from his left, and he turned to see Dex taking his usual seat. "No. Pretty sure she's gone back on the road," Dunstan said morosely. Dunstan popped some of the pasta into his mouth, not really wanting to eat, but not having a lot else to do. It tasted pretty good, better than the stuff they served at the group home, but there was always that underlying metallic taste that seemed to permeate a lot of what they ate here. It wasn't necessarily that the food was bad, it just tasted as if it came out of a machine, or maybe it was 3D printed onto their plates. "Tough break, but maybe you'll still get lucky, and she's somewhere around here. I might find out, too, if anybody was willing to talk to me. I've talked with every minder that I can find, and none of them seem like they want to say more than get lost. I don't know if there's some kind of code of silence in this place, but it almost seems like they're trying to stonewall me." Tex looked around, clearly trying to pick his audience, before leaning in a little to whisper to Dunstan, "I'm sure there's a lot of secrecy surrounding the people that go out to get the kids. Those are probably not the sort of people you want others people putting names to. You'd have to find someone who's willing to help you. Somebody who maybe thinks of us as more than lab rats." Dunstan sighed. "I know what you're going to say, but I'm just not ready to talk to him." Dex swirled his fork around in his own pasta, pulling a mouthful up from the plate before just looking at it as it dripped sauce back onto the tray. "I know the last time you spoke with him wasn't particularly nice, but I hear he's been asking questions about you." Dunstan snorted. Dr. Hammarskjöld probably had been asking all sorts of questions about him. He imagined he had gone to talk to Dex and Gerald and maybe some of the other Green Band kids, but he probably hadn't gotten curious enough to go talk with Rebecca yet. Rebecca had never said anything about him, but she made it pretty clear that the next time she saw Dr. Hammarskjöld, she was going to hurt the little man. Dunstan had been forced to go to their daily sessions, but he'd kept his responses short and polite when he was dealing with the little doctor. Dr. Hammarskjöld seemed taken aback by these encounters, but not overly hurt by them. Dunstan supposed that lots of kids had probably treated him similarly once some of the magic had worn off this place. He imagined there were probably quite a few kids who came to resent him, or, felt some kind of way when they realized what he stood for. But the transition from friendly to cordial that had gone through Dunstan was more than a little bit strange. He and Dunstan had not been friends, but Dunstan was the kind of guy who liked to joke and cut up with people. He usually spoke candidly to the little guy, but now it was all yes sir and no sir and business as unusual. He had seen the hurt on Hammarskjöld's face, but the doctor had been too much of a professional to bring it up. He had gone on the way he always had, and for that Dunstan had been glad. He didn't really want to go on any more field trips into Dr. Hammarskjöld's past if he could help it. "I don't know how you do it. After what you saw in his head, I don't think I could be in the same room with him day in and day out. He knows what's happening to us, and he goes right on doing it. Something really messed up about that." "That's just it," Dunstan said. "I don't think he enjoys what he's doing to us. Not like some of the others do. I get the feeling that there are guys here who really enjoy doing experiments on us and making our lives a living hell. But that's not Dr. Hammarskjöld. I get the feeling that he's just waiting for someone to wise up so that he can get us some help. But it's never going to happen. I'm no genius, but even I can see that he's fighting a losing battle. This administration doesn't even see us as people. We're just a bottom line for them, kids or not. We're just here to serve a purpose. And when we stop serving that purpose, then it's time to get a new bunch of kids." Dex shrugged. Sounds a lot like it is on the outside, too. I know a lot of people in the system who, once they stop being cute, the system stops working for them. They age out, and then it all seems to be over for them. Yeah, except in the system, they don't let a monster eat you when you stop being cute. Dex laughed. He just couldn't help himself. As messed up as it was, Dunstan had the right of it. Well, keep at it, man. After I get done with the spaghetti, I guess I'm off to see if I can find any more holes in the system. Seems to me that it's a lost cause, but Rebecca wants to cover all our bases, and it seems like she's in charge these days. He held out his fist for Dunstan to bump, and as he took his plate and headed out, Dunstan looked back at his own plate with very little interest. He jumped a little when someone tapped him on the shoulder, and he looked down to see the last person that he wanted to find. "Dunstan, may I sit for a minute?" It wasn't rare to find a teacher in the cafeteria, but most of them took their meals off somewhere rather than sitting around and eating with the students. There wasn't a rule against it, but Dunstan knew that if the little doctor was out here eating with him, then it was a little more than a social call. He didn't say anything, but Dr. Hammershoal took his silence for acceptance. "I understand you've been looking for someone who helped during the midterms?" Dunstan started to ignore him, but finally just nodded, a bit unsure what else to do. Not saying anything would be as good as admitting that he was, and if Hammershoal took that back to the mysterious security chief, then it could be really bad. Dunstan didn't have anything worked out for this gambit, but he didn't have a lot of choices other than to talk or walk away. "Who is it? I ask because the only person who helped you during the midterm was me, and I know you haven't been looking for me lately." Dunstan slid his spaghetti around, trying to come up with a lie and finally just deciding to press his luck. "It's a woman. Brown hair, pretty, but not in the way most people think. We talked in the hall a few times, and I just wanted to get a message to her. Maybe see if she wanted to talk to me again." Dr. Hammershoal looked skeptical, but seemed willing nonetheless. "You've done me a kindness, Dunstan, and I'd like to pay you back somehow. I'd be willing to take a look, and all I ask is that you let me read the message before I pass it on." Dunstan felt his hand tighten around it. "Why?" Dr. Hammershoal shrugged comically. "Because I want to make sure that it won't get me slapped or something. Trust me, Dunstan, nothing I read will go any further than us. Scout's honor." Dunstan doubted the little man had ever been a scout, but that didn't matter. If it had been anyone else, Dunstan would have kept the note and left immediately, but he'd taken a peek inside the little doctor, and he knew that if he said he wouldn't tell, then he wouldn't tell. He slid the note, their eyes locked on each other, and as Dr. Hammershoal glanced at it, his eyes grew very large. "Are you serious?" he asked, his small hand covering the note. Dunstan nodded. "No one else but her. Are we understood? Otherwise, I will sit down in class and touch nothing for the rest of my time here." Dr. Hammershoal sucked in a breath. "Dunstan, if this is true, then someone should know. Ex-students having children is normally highly frowned upon, and it could lead to—" "You said you wanted to pay me back. Hand her the note or don't, I don't care. But if you screw me over, I'm done helping you at all." Dr. Hammershoal looked at the paper again, and then nodded once before pulling the note into his pocket and leaving his tray on the table as he headed for the office in the back of the house. Dr. Hammershoal hoped that he would find her, because this was news indeed. Gerald and Rebecca were back in the library, Rebecca pretending to read a book as she tried to come up with a way to get them out of here. It had been on her mind a lot lately. It seemed to be the only thing that she was really thinking about these days. If Dunstan was right, then they had to get out of here soon, or else face the very real possibility that some of them might graduate. The alternative wasn't a lot better either. It was either graduate and become dinner for some monster, or wash out and have your powers taken away from you. Rebecca had never really wanted her abilities. She had been afraid of them when they first started to manifest, but she had just started to explore them and wasn't in a big hurry to give them up so that whatever lived under the kindergarten could place it in its daily smoothie or whatever. "So far, we've had absolutely no luck," Gerald whispered, as two of Masha's old friends walked past giggling. Gerald hadn't even bothered to open up a book and pretend to read. He was of the opinion that if they knew what they were doing, then they'd already found it out. He seemed to think there wasn't much in this place that they didn't already know, and it would be more advantageous to spring it when they weren't expecting it, or when they were busy, than to operate under the assumption that they didn't know. Rebecca could understand that, but she did wish he would at least try to maintain a little bit of secrecy. "We may have to come up with something different," Rebecca said. "Dex hasn't found any openings in their defenses, and I can't seem to find anyone who can do anything with technology. It looks like we might have to rely on Dunstan and his mysterious mother if we're going to get out of here." "That's pretty slim hope," Gerald said, as he slouched back in his chair. "This woman may or may not help us, or she may be in so deep in the Blacksite's pocket that she may lure us into a trap." "Yeah, but what's the alternative? We just sit and do nothing and wait to be scooped out?" Gerald didn't say anything for a moment. He was looking around as if trying to count the tiles in the library, but Rebecca knew that he was looking for the strings. He did this all the time, and sometimes it made her wonder if he even saw her. Was she just a string to him? Were they all just strings to him? "I don't suppose the strings can show you anything that might be helpful," she said, sounding a little frustrated. "Maybe," Gerald said. "I've been seeing some strange combinations lately. One of them's been hovering around our friend Dex." Rebecca blinked. "Dex? He's a red band. Everything he does is in the physical world, at least that's what they say." "Yeah, well, how many green bands do you know that can astral project out of their bodies and wander around the school? Maybe these people don't know everything that they think they do. For that matter, there's a very fine line between most of our ability sets. Red bands are physical, green bands are somewhere between physical and immaterial, and then blue bands operate completely inside the immaterial." "That's true, but you mean to tell me there's never been anyone who towed the line? I see things that are immaterial, but they also affect the material world. But who's to say that they're real at all? Maybe the strings are just something that I've manifested to help me get over my deteriorating mental state. Maybe it's all something I could control with medication, or it's, I don't know, all just some kind of early onset dementia. They don't know, I don't know, and nobody seems to have a damn clue. I'm not saying that it's not real. I've based my whole life around the strings. I'm just saying that the people who claim to be experts don't really have a clue." Rebecca shook her head. "No, they have to know something. Why else would they be allowed to just feed special children to this creature? If they don't know anything, then why would anybody trust them with taxpayers' money?" It was getting difficult to keep their voices down. Gerald was saying a lot of things that made sense, but that made them even scarier. She had to believe that these people knew what they were talking about, because the alternative was horrifying. This was America, after all. No one was just going to stand by and let some shadowy government agency snatch children at random. She knew from spending time with many of them that several of them were like Dex and Dunstan. They were street kids, or they were kids in the system, or they were kids who had recently been adopted. The majority of them, however, were kids from families, and even broken families generally don't want their kids to just disappear one day. She also wondered what happened when the parents roundly refused to let the kindergarten take their children. Did the Blacksite take them by force? Did the Blacksite kill their parents? Had the Blacksite killed her parents? She shook it off. That was something she didn't really want to think about, even at her lowest. Her parents hadn't been perfect, far from it, but she still loved them. She kept thinking of times when she and her mother would make cookies together before her father got home, or when they would just sit in the living room and watch TV. She remembered the times her father would come home in a good mood, and they might go get pizza, or they might go see a movie. Her childhood hadn't been all roses, but there were good points, and she wanted there to be more of them when she escaped this part of her life. If her parents were dead, then what was there to escape for? I can't shake the feeling that Dex might have the thing we're looking for. Gerald cut in, scattering her thoughts like wild birds. Let's hope so, 'cause right now, we're batting 1,000. Her powers are progressing at a staggering rate. I would say she is the most likely out of not just the Blue Band class, but any class to graduate. Security Chief Ridley nodded as Miss Cashmere told him all about her very special student. It didn't surprise him much. Security Chief Ridley had read the reports and knew how special Masha was. There had been notes in her school file where even the most unimaginative of teachers had sensed that there was something not quite normal about her, as far back as when she was 2 and taking classes at a Montessori school. Teachers, especially those who spent extended amounts of time with their charges, were not as blind as some people like to think, and it's difficult to spend a quarter of a day with someone and not see something a little bit strange. That is good news, the old devil crooned as he turned away from the monitors and gave her his full attention. And that's the only growth she's had lately? Miss Cashmere stiffened. Yes, she's still a little girl, and I think given time she could possess a... That's not what I'm talking about, and you know it. I'm talking about other abilities that may have manifested. Have you noticed any of those in Masha? Anything you might need to report? Miss Cashmere looked guilty as she tried to concoct an appropriate lie. Why don't you just go ahead and tell me before this turns into something you don't want? Security Chief Ridley told her, with a less than comforting smile. Okay, well, I wanted to gather more data first, but it appears that Masha has developed abilities outside of her power set. From the camera footage, it looked an awful lot like technomancy. We had long suspected that she had more than a little bit of telekinesis as well, but this is a game changer. I didn't intend to keep it from you, Miss Cashmere assured him. I simply wanted to be sure that... Security Chief Ridley crossed his arms and gave her a look that clearly said he wasn't buying it. You wanted to be certain that you could milk a finder's fee out of it. You wanted to be sure that you would be compensated for your stellar observation skills. You wanted to be certain that when she graduated, you got the bonus that comes along with it. Is that pretty close to the mark? Miss Cashmere was stricken, but when Security Chief Ridley laughed, she relaxed a little bit. Relax, Donna. I'm not going to fire you or have you executed for poor judgment. I can appreciate a certain amount of nest feathering, and I have no intention of removing her from your teaching. You don't? I don't. In fact, I have a new teacher for the Blue Band group, and I would like to offer you a chance to move to an advanced course. How would you like to be the new handler for the Black Band group? Miss Cashmere looked confused. As far as I know, the only black band student was killed in a training exercise. That's true. So we have an opening for a new black band student, and I would like it to be Masha. Miss Cashmere was beginning to catch on. You want me to teach her one-on-one? Is that what you're saying? Ridley had to stop himself from rolling his eyes. This woman had been teaching special needs children in Iowa after a mediocre stint in the Army before they had asked her to come teach here. She barely had a 12th grade education, but that hadn't stopped her from having a high opinion of herself. The idea that she would be allowed to have full control over the curriculum of a child like Masha was ludicrous at best. It would be less teaching and more handling her day-to-day education. Your lesson plans would be highly scrutinized by myself and Dr. Hammershoal. You would be under observation during class sessions, so we could be certain that any advancements in her abilities would be properly documented. And of course, you would receive a bonus for finding her, an increase in pay for what would likely be a hazardous new position, and a larger bonus when she graduates. Is this something you might be interested in? Miss Cashmere was practically vibrating as she nodded. Absolutely. This sounds like a wonderful career advancement. Security Chief Ridley smiled at her, but there was very little humor in it. Don't get the wrong idea, Miss Cashmere. If you survive your handling of Masha, you would return to the Blue Band group next year. The little girl seems to trust you, maybe trust you more than she should, and we would like to utilize that trust in order to keep her in line. I don't need to tell you what a graduate like this would do for the program. A power set like this could mean we all get a vacation for the next couple of months, instead of having to feed this thing again so soon. You weren't here for the last black band graduate, but it was quite a sight to see. Masha isn't the only one to show progress in multiple power sets, and Catherine Cleary could manifest all 3 power types. I don't expect that Masha will get quite that large. Catherine was a prodigy, ahead of her time in so many ways, and it was a shame that we had to waste her on something like that. I suppose maybe it was for the best. Someone with that kind of power could have been a real threat to the security of any nation in which she resided. Masha may be the same. She's so young, and her powers are so malleable, that I think we could expect nothing less than a full manifestation from her before graduation. Miss Cashmere nodded but said nothing. She'd never known anyone to manifest more than one ability at a time, and she'd never heard of this Catherine person. The idea that the little girl might be able to affect all 3 power manifestations was a little scary, but Miss Cashmere knew that it would be something great for not just the program, but for the Blacksite. Such a student was 1 in a million, and both the team that snatched the girl and her minder could expect a substantial bonus once everything was accomplished. When should I start this new program? Security Chief Ridley spun around to face the monitors behind him. We will officially recognize her tomorrow at the start of class. Miss Honeycutt will take over for you, and Masha will go on to whatever is scheduled for tomorrow. There will be a few days of integration into the new program, and then I expect we will test her on the white band girl. She'll need to work very hard to be ready for graduation. You'll help get her there, I hope. Miss Cashmere assured him that she would, and she left with the biggest grin she'd had in years. Security Chief Ridley was pleased as well. A student like this truly was once in a lifetime, and it could save the lives of quite a few children if it was done right. That didn't matter to him in the slightest, but the people who signed his checks would appreciate the lapse in budget when he didn't have to operate the kindergarten for another 3 to 6 months. There would be the usual techs left behind to monitor the creature and to make sure it wasn't getting restless, but the work would go on as it always had. The work had been going on since before Security Chief Ridley was old enough to shave, and it would go on long after he was dust in the ground. Dex was looking at the display on the radio like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. He had set it to a local rap station that he'd discovered, something that had taken a little bit of finagling to find, and he'd been playing a game that he had played since childhood. It was a simple game, something that most people did, whether they thought about it or not. Dex would try to guess the song that was going to come on next, out of the hundreds of thousands of songs that it could be. He had always been pretty good at it, better than most, and he always seemed to be able to pick 3 or 4 songs out of 10 that were going to come on. He didn't know what it was. Sometimes it was the way the DJ paused before he read it. Sometimes it was just a feeling. But he'd been pretty good at picking them out for as long as he could remember. Today, however, he was on fire. He'd picked 9 out of the 10 songs that had been on in the last hour, and as the disc jockey came back on to pump them up for the next song, he suddenly thought, or felt, that it was going to be Heartless by Kanye West. He didn't know how he knew it, but he had a really strong feeling, and that was usually how it went. Thanks for tuning in to 102.4 The Smoke. Next up, we've got Kanye West with On a Whim, and for no particular reason. Dex found himself thinking that he wished it had been a Jay-Z song that he'd been thinking of lately. It was just the beat that had been skipping through his head lately, and when the DJ paused suddenly, Dex took notice. Scratch that! Looks like I've got a little technical glitch here. Looks like coming up next we've got Hard Knock Life by Jay-Z. Stay tuned for the hits here on 102.4 The Smoke. Dex felt his blood run cold as the track started to play. That had been a little more than a coincidence. The guy had pretty much told him that his original guess had been right, and then he'd changed it to the song he'd been thinking about. As Dex sat back and listened to the beat that had been popping through his head for the last couple of days, he began to wonder if it was just a coincidence. Maybe this was some kind of new power that he was getting. Rebecca told him how she had astrally projected, and he was pretty sure that Masha was doing some new and interesting things about a week ago here in the media room. He supposed maybe a lot of people's powers were changing, so why shouldn't his? Well, because he was a red band. All his powers were strictly physical. He was a Cyclops or a Psylocke or maybe even an Iceman. All of his powers came from things he concocted into the real world. And the sort of things that he was thinking about were like the kind of stuff they did in the blue band class. When they weren't running obstacle courses or fighting each other, Cutter took a few minutes every day to teach them about the different power sets and what they meant. Dunstan said that they did that a little in the green band as well, and Cutter's lectures were probably a little less complex than all that. Cutter had told them that red bands were physical, green bands were physical and mental, and blue bands were strictly mental. The kind of thing that Dex had going on was strictly physical, using his mind to change things in the real world. He supposed that was also mental too, but how much of it was mental? On a whim, he looked down at the little radio in his hand and thought at it. He didn't exactly know how this worked, but he figured he had time, so he might as well experiment a little bit with it. On the front of the radio, the words Hard Knock Life by Jay-Z were marching across the digital surface as the song hit its halfway point. As Dexter thought at it, the words suddenly scrambled and were replaced by the phrase, "Yes, Dexter, you're doing this." Dex was shocked. How the hell was this possible? He tried it again, thinking something different at the radio. But this time the words jumbled up into incomprehensible jargon. Dex stopped, realizing his excitement was messing with it and tried to focus on what he was doing, even though it was something he didn't really understand. He glanced around, not wanting to be noticed, but everyone else was just going about their normal day-to-day as he made his discovery. He wondered how many others were trying to hide their own evolving powers, but he set that aside. He had to focus on what he was doing for the moment. 30 minutes later, he was able to make the words on the radio display pretty much whatever he wanted. It was cool and all, a neat little party trick, but he didn't really see how it could be used practically. Dexter thought about it, listening as a news song came on and trying to focus his thoughts around something a little more solid. He'd read a book once when he was attending school. It was a school book, and given that he'd been in elementary school, it seemed to have been a little too advanced for the kids there. He couldn't remember the name, but in the book, a man had used his mind to disassemble a computer and turn it into a weapon. Dexter had liked it because the guy had powers just like his. They'd been different, but he still had them. Dex wondered if he could do things like that, pulling apart something and putting it back together. He looked at the clock on the desk beside him and focused all his mental faculties on it. He saw it coming apart in his mind, saw it reforming itself into something else. But when he opened his eyes, it was still just a clock. It hadn't moved, and it hadn't changed. But even though the clock was the same, the hands on the clock were different. They had begun to spin, making him a little dizzy as he watched them. He finally had to look away as his stomach did a flip. It wasn't exactly what he wanted to do, but it was something. So he could affect some things, but not other things. Dex had always liked experimenting. Some of the guys he had been friends with hadn't thought much past their next meal, but Dex had always been something of a planner. He had liked building things and making plans and getting things together so that when the time came, they would be ready. The clubhouse where he and his gang had lived had been one such plan, and it had taken weeks to finally bring it to fruition. What was left of the gang probably still had food and drinking water after they had broken into that storage unit when they saw the guy putting back supplies. This was just a different sort of experimentation, and it was close enough that Dex felt comfortable taking it a little at a time. He looked around for something else that he could mess with, and when his eyes fell on one of the computers sitting near the media area, he thought that might be just the thing. The computers weren't good for much. Playing games on or downloading music was about all they could do, but maybe there was some way that he could make them better. He went over to sit at one, pretending to play a little game so that no one would notice him. But what he was really doing was seeing what he could manipulate inside the game. It wasn't an online game, and it probably wasn't receiving regular updates, so its code would likely be very malleable. He moved the little animal around the screen, picking up berries and biting at enemies, but what he was really doing was trying to insert messages into the game. It was slow going. Despite being an older game, the code was stubborn and didn't seem to want to move as the code on the radio had. That wasn't surprising. The code on the player would be like a child's toy next to all those moving pieces of intricate game code. It was also hard to make the gameplay look natural while he was thinking at the program. After an hour, Dex had managed to do little more than make some doodles in the digital sand. Didn't even really look like words. It looked like a kid's sand scribbles at the beach. Dex closed out the game and moved on. He would have time to work on this another day. Time was something he seemed to have here, now that his social calendar was less full. They had a month and a half before graduation, however, so time wasn't a luxury that they had in abundance. If Dex was going to get this to work, he would need to keep practicing. From across the game room, sitting behind a group of kids who are watching TV, Gerald studied the string that linked the two of them together and hoped he was right about his friend. There weren't a lot of strings left to pull, and he wanted to exhaust all possibilities before time ran out. "I know you spoke with the boy from the Blue Band group, the one who keeps finding all those children. I want to know what you talked about, and I don't want any funny business." Dr. Hammarskjöld had expected a conversation like this. There were cameras everywhere, and the idea that Security Chief Ridley wouldn't have noticed their conversation was slim to nil. He had prepared himself for any number of gambits, but the one thing he wouldn't do was tell the old ghoul the truth. This may be Dr. Hammarskjöld's job, but he was no more thrilled about it than any of the kids who were stuck here. He was here because he had to be, and it was the only way that he could get anyone to take his research seriously. He could go out into the world and be a professor or some science lackey, but he would always come back to this place when they called, because in a lot of ways it was home, and when they called, you had to go back home. "We had an incident during his midterm. Dunstan got a little overwhelmed with one of the exercises, and I tried to talk to him about it before he ran away. He's been avoiding me after that, when he can, and I wanted to talk with him about it so that we could clear the air." Dr. Hammarskjöld knew that Ridley wasn't likely to believe that, but he also knew that the audio in the cafeteria wasn't good enough to pick out individual conversations, unless it was really fine-tuned to do so. Most of the techs who knew how to do that didn't know how to get clean audio from something like that anyway, so he felt his conversation with Dunstan was pretty safe. Ridley looked at him as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Are you sure that's all the two of you talked about? You didn't maybe share any secrets with him that might be best left unheard? The kind of secrets that a teacher might have shared with you once upon a time?" Dr. Hammarskjöld shook his head. "No, sir. I don't feel the need to burden my charges with anything unduly heavy in that way that you do. I was simply trying to console him, so we didn't find him dead one evening. I've been helping him repress some of those visions he sees, the truly grisly ones. But I think, perhaps, he figured out what I was doing, and it made him have a small fit. He's better now, and we're back on speaking terms again." "I'm so glad that you and a little boy are friends again," Security Chief Ridley said, in a way that he knew would get under the little man's skin. "Friends? No, sir. You can't be friends with the children. You've seen to that. They aren't even people anymore as far as you're concerned. They're just cogs in a machine that do exactly what you want them to do, until their teeth chip off, and then you throw them in the scrap heap." Security Chief Ridley smiled at him, but it was not an altogether healthy smile. "Careful, Nathan, or I'll get the feeling that you don't have any teeth left, and it might be time to throw you into the junk pile. Regardless, I suspect that some of the students are planning something. I want you to keep a close eye on the Blue Band group, especially Dunstan. He's been meeting with several of the students that I suspect are up to no good, and I want to know if it's a prank or something a little worse." Dr. Hammarskjöld raised an eyebrow. "Which students do you suspect?" Security Chief Ridley steepled his fingers and shook his head at the little doctor. "Never you mind, but keep an eye on Dunstan and Gerald as well. I'd ask you to keep an eye on Rebecca, but she's not one of the students that you often have the pleasure of doing exercises with, is she?" Dr. Hammarskjöld looked away, but this time his shame was apparent. He blamed himself for the girl being here, and rightfully so. He'd been a plant for the kindergarten, for the Blacksite, and if she had to blame someone for being here, he was a pretty good target. She had also been his patient, and she had felt betrayed when she realized that he hadn't been there to take care of her, but to groom her and throw her to the wolves. She hadn't spoken to him the whole time that she'd been here, and who could blame her? He had betrayed her trust, and if the roles were reversed, he wouldn't have wanted to speak to her either. He would have probably wanted to beat the crap out of her, and he suspected there was a beating in his future from that front. "If you're planning something noble in that foolish little head of yours," Security Chief Ridley said, which brought Dr. Hammarskjöld out of his daydream, "then I'd squash it now. These children are government assets, not grade schoolers who need you to help them. What we choose to do with them is sanctioned by the government and outside the purview of you, or me, or anyone else for that matter." "That's a lie," Dr. Hammarskjöld said, as he stood to his full and less than respectable 4'10". "I can't imagine that any government knows about this place, or what exactly is going on. I'm sure that they fund it. I'm sure that it appears on an expense report or two, but it would really disappoint me to know that anyone actually has a clue what's going on here." "Think whatever you like," Ridley said, "but you know that the government does worse things than this. This is a drop in the bucket, nothing in the grand scheme of things, and you would do well to remember that you are a part of it. If you start having ideas about telling someone or helping someone get information out, then you should remember that you'll go down with the ship right along with the rest of us. How much paperwork has your name on it, right next to mine? How many lesson plans and daily logs have you signed? You may not agree with it, but you're a part of it. So go on and do your little research, and when you realize that all your test subjects will be gone in the next month and a half, you'll realize that it amounts to nothing. With any luck, we won't need you to come back for a while, and you can go back to doing whatever it is that you decide to do. You're only as useful as I believe you are, and your usefulness is starting to wear thin." "May I go now?" Dr. Hammarskjöld asked, his own patience running thin. "I have work to do, and not a lot of time to do it." Security Chief Ridley spun back to his monitors, dismissing him with a wave. "Go on, then, but remember that we are always watching." Dr. Hammarskjöld excused himself after that, and left Security Chief Ridley's office as he went back to doing what he'd been doing for the past 4 days. He had asked around covertly, saying that he had borrowed something from one of the snatchers and wanted help finding them. He learned that the woman, Janice, had been here not even a couple of weeks ago, but she had gone on leave and wasn't expected back until the end of the month. That was pretty thin time for what Dunstan was hoping for, but he supposed it wouldn't be out of the question. If he could arrange for Janice to meet her long-lost son and maybe get some kind of closure for both of them, then maybe, just maybe, it would make the other things he was going to do a little more palatable. He had met with her partner, the brute that she always went out on snatch and grabs with, and had asked him to relay a message to her if he would. Wheeler had laughed as he looked at the little man. "Don't take this the wrong way, Doc, but I can already tell you you're not her type." Dr. Hammarskjöld had smiled. This was the usual sort of comments he got from people who saw him as little more than a child himself, and told him that he had a message to give to her. He said that if he could set up a meeting with her when she came back, he would be very appreciative. The man had nodded and said that he would talk to her about it. That had been a couple of days ago, and now he was gone as well. Dr. Hammarskjöld didn't know where the snatchers went when they weren't here, probably to the same place that he went when he wasn't here, which was anywhere that wasn't here. He hoped that she would get the message, and that she would be here in time for Dunstan to meet her. Dr. Hammarskjöld sometimes saw a lot of his own daughter and the kids with the weird powers, and he knew that If he could meet with his own daughter for more than a few minutes, he would probably give up anything. If he could just work up the courage to tell her who he was and ask her if she would like to get dinner or maybe just talk for a little while, he believed he could die happy and maybe put all of this behind him. He would have to answer someday for all of this, for all that he had done for the Blacksite, but maybe helping Dunstan would make some of it go down a little easier. Rebecca found that most of her time was spent feeling like a failure. She'd given the others tasks to accomplish, but she didn't seem to be making any progress herself. It had all seemed so easy when she put forth the idea. No one had ever escaped from the Blacksite before because no one had ever tried. If someone had tried, then surely it would have been easy, so it wouldn't be that hard for them to get out. She had assumed that Dex would find some means of escape through a sewage pipe or through a ventilation duct, something that usually happened in the movies and books. She had assumed that Dunstan's mysterious mother would find a way to get them all out of the Blacksite unnoticed. She'd assumed that Gerald's weird strings would provide the answer, but none of them had done much more than waste time. Now, they were looking at a month and a half before graduation, and she didn't have a lot to show for it. "There has to be something here that can help me," Rebecca said, as she flipped through library book after library book. She had assembled quite a few of them. Books on sleight of hand and escape magic, books on getting through electronic systems, and even books on basic locks and their installations. That wasn't what the books were about, of course. They were books on other topics that just happened to be connected, but there were always things that you could learn from them. The library mostly had a bunch of fantasy and sci-fi novels, with a fair amount of books that her mother would have considered tween garbage. Amongst them, however, there were also books about electrical systems, HVAC repair, or plumbing. She didn't know why these books were here, but somehow it felt like that was part of the puzzle as well. The books were here so you could figure out how to escape. No one had ever done it because they hadn't wanted to. She would find the answers in these books, and then she and her friends would escape. In her head, it was very cut and dry, but in practice, it seemed a little more difficult. A lot of what they were dealing with was not technology that she was familiar with. A lot of what they were dealing with was card readers and electronic locks. Manuals on electrical systems were useful, but not overly so. At the end of the day, she would have to put it all together if she intended to get herself out, much less her friends. "You'll never find what you're looking for in there." Rebecca gritted her teeth as she tried to push the annoying little voice out of the back of her head. It was getting louder lately, a voice that she had heard since she was younger. Sometimes it would come in to remind her that she was just a little girl and she wasn't big enough to solve these problems on her own. It would remind her that other people were better suited for the task and that she should just keep her head down and her mouth shut if she didn't want to embarrass herself. Rebecca had tried her best to squash these voices for years, but as her frustration grew, the presence of the voice grew louder. "You should let Dex lead. He's the best suited to be the leader." She ignored it as she went on reading books. Dex would have made a good leader, but Rebecca had something that Dex didn't. Rebecca was getting better at pushing her mind out of her body so she could walk the halls in her sleep. She had gotten better at understanding things that she was seeing as well. At first, none of them had made sense. It was like a world assembled out of mist and construction paper. Things lacked definition when you were looking at them through the eyes of someone who had left their body. Slowly, too slowly for her taste, she had begun to feel a sense of it, and now she navigated the halls like she would have her own home. She had seen the offices in the back of the school. She had seen where the teachers and the minders lay down to sleep after school was over. She had seen where Security Chief Ridley stayed up until all hours and watched cameras endlessly. She had found something truly spectacular, something that she had thought she would never see again, towards the back of the facility. She took a corridor at random, passed through a few locked doors, and suddenly, she was outside. The door had simply opened on to an average outside area. She had felt her breath catch in her chest as she heard crickets and frogs, and felt the hazy warmth of a midsummer evening. She had wanted to stay there forever. She had contemplated just never going back to her body and exploring this world where she was truly free. Without a body, she could go where she wanted and do what she wanted. She was like Casper, the friendly ghost. She could do anything. It was tempting, but she remembered that people were counting on her and decided to go back instead. It didn't stop her from staying out there for nearly half an hour, but she did come back in the end. And what good is it? You can't use it to escape. You can't use it to do anything important. It's a silly power, and even if it was important, you wouldn't know how to use it. Shut up, shut up, shut up, Rebecca growled under her breath as she kept looking through books. The librarians must think she had gone crazy. Across the table, she had about 12 books open to random pages, and as she leafed through them, she learned a little more about what she needed to do. Not enough, the voice said to her. You aren't helping, she growled a little louder. I can come back if you're busy, said a familiar voice over her shoulder. Rebecca turned and found Gerald lurking behind her. He'd always been such a lurker, content to skulk around instead of just coming up and telling her what she needed to hear. She squashed that, though, feeling it was unkind and untrue. But sometimes he could be a real creepy crawler. No, I'm just processing over things I can't understand. What have you found? I hope it's good news. It may be. I seem to have discovered something about our friend, Dex. Something that might help us get out a message, the one we've been trying to get out. Rebecca lifted an eyebrow at him. Oh, don't tell me that Dex has suddenly become a master of magnetism or something. Something like that, Gerald said. I think if the two of us go and talk to him about it, he might be more willing to spill the beans. Feel like taking a walk? Rebecca found that she did, and as the two of them walked towards the media room, she felt like things might be turning around for the first time in a while. But how long will that last? Rebecca squashed the annoying voice and hoped that once she discovered a way out of this place, it would finally be silent forever. Masha watched them go from the corner of the library. She was tired from her new classes and just wanted to relax with a good book for a while. She had come to find something to read, but had stopped when she saw Rebecca and Gerald talking. She had to admit that she missed them, but it really wasn't her place to argue with the curriculum of the kindergarten. She had started to tell a teacher about what they were planning to do, but that wasn't her business either. If they wanted to get in trouble, then let them. She wanted to further her education, and it appeared that she was getting what she wanted. Her band was now black instead of blue, and it seemed to carry a certain amount of respect with the other kids that got in her way. She did feel a little lonely sometimes. She had liked having friends. She had liked hanging out with Dex and Dunstan, and then with Rebecca and Gerald as well. She had never really had friends at her old school. Perhaps people had been a little bit nervous of her. She was very smart, and that could be intimidating. Dex had always treated her like a little sister, and Dunstan had never seemed put off by any weird powers that he saw. It was refreshing to have that kind of interaction with people. It almost made her feel like a normal girl. She started to follow after them, but decided that whatever they were doing was nothing to her. It was hard, though. It was hard separating herself from that group. She'd gone full circle now. She still didn't have any friends, other than Miss Cashmere. She supposed that was fine. She had power, and she didn't need friends. Still, it was lonely, and she would have liked to have had someone to talk to. She just knew that Dex or Rebecca would have been impressed with her powers. She just knew that Gerald would have been able to point her in the right direction if he knew what she was doing. She was sure that Dunstan would have made some kind of funny comment about what she could do, and she actually took a step after them before shaking her head and going to find something to read. That part of her life was over now, and it was time to refocus. She'd have friends again, just not right now. There was always time for more friends, especially after she had fully manifested. Once she was powerful, everyone would want to be her friend. Bedtime, kiddos. Everyone to the bunk area for some shut-eye. The kids made their way to their beds as another day in the kindergarten came to an end. Masha cast a glance at Dex as he walked to his bunk. Rebecca quieted her mind for a good night's exploration. Dex and Dunstan nodded to each other as they climbed beneath the sheets, and Gerald just stared at a slowly pulsing string as it stretched across the ground. The lights dimmed as everyone settled in for the night, and slowly the kindergarten quieted. But despite the children's quieting for another night of sleep, elsewhere, people were doing anything but settling down. Elsewhere, there was still business to be done, and evils to accomplish before the day was out. Cutter looked up from a strenuous workout as the overhead announcements rang out before turning back to his weights. 45, 46, 47, 48. Cutter liked to maintain his physique. When you worked with kids that could explode your brain from the inside, you had to come to terms with that however you could. Cutter liked to do so by pushing his body to its absolute limits and making himself as imposing as possible. He learned a long time ago that just because a kid could crush you into paste with an errant thought or make you cluck like a chicken by invading your brain didn't mean that they would. Most of them were still just kids. They could be intimidated, they could be scared, and they could be charmed by an adult who seemed to be impressed by them. Cutter had put hands on some of them before, and it was amazing how they folded when someone with absolute authority finally stepped in. 49, 50. He put the bar back in the rack with only a little noise as he sat up and wiped sweat from his brow. Cutter considered this to be his vacation and his retirement after serving 2 tours in Iraq. Cutter had served with guys who had joined the Marines because they wanted their school paid for, or because they wanted action and adventure with none of the getting shot at, and hadn't really appreciated being in an active war zone. They were wannabes, fake warriors, and when the bullets started flying, they suddenly wanted to be anywhere but there. Cutter had a leg up on most of them. Cutter had been in Desert Storm when he was fresh out of boot camp, and done some things for his country over there that would have maybe been considered distasteful. He had discovered that he liked hurting people when he was younger, and he had taken it into the military with him. If it hadn't been for some hard-nosed general pushing him out after an incident in Kandahar, Cutter would probably still be overseas, shooting people for one organization or another. Instead, the Blacksite had decided that he could be of use to them, and he'd been here for the last 20 years doing just that. Cutter was a survivor, but he was getting old, too. He knew he didn't have many more years of this, his usual formidability, left in him, and he intended to extend it as far as he could. He moved on to another machine and continued his workout. Cutter knew guys he had gone to high school with who were using walkers and pissing in bags right now. That wasn't going to be him. He'd put a bullet in his head before he let anyone see that kind of weakness in him. 1, 2, 3, 4. The weights went up and down as the cords on his arms bulged and slackened. Cutter could go like this for hours, and after the week he'd had, he just might. Nothing put him to sleep like a bottle of Jack and a good workout, and he intended to push it to the limit tonight. By the time he fell into his rack, he wanted to be good and thoroughly tired. Dr. Hammarskjöld was finishing up a report and rubbing at the bridge of his nose. He still hadn't heard back from the woman that Dunstan claimed was his mother. He was beginning to wonder if he would hear back from her in time. He wanted to help Dunstan, maybe get him some closure, or give him a quiet place to land after all this was over. But he knew that happy endings weren't the norm for these kids. He also knew that Security Chief Ridley was still keeping an eye on him. Every time he passed by one of those camera housings, it felt like eyes boring into him, and it made him flinch just a little bit every time. He didn't know why he was so nervous about being watched. So what if they were watching him? He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't hurting anyone or committing any treason. He was simply doing something he felt was right. He looked at a tab next to the one that he was typing in and clicked over to look at an email that he was drafting. He had drafted about 100 emails like it, but he had never sent one of them. Working for the government had its advantages, and finding his daughter's email account had certainly been one of them. She was an adult. She would want to hear from him. But every time he finished an email and read it over, it always sounded pathetic and weak to his own ears. Why would she want to talk to him? He had abandoned them. He had left them to whatever fate might have in store. He was a failure, at least in their eyes he would be. He couldn't expect anything of them. The same thing they had always expected from him. He hovered his cursor over it to delete the email, and then clicked over to the report instead before it could find its way into the garbage bin, as so many had. Coward, he told himself. Maybe he was a coward, but he didn't know what he would do if she rejected him or didn't want to speak to him at all. People had been rejecting him for most of his life, and every time it was a little harder to see the good in humanity. They hated him because he was short and because he was deformed. They didn't hate him because he was essentially practicing eugenics for the government. They didn't hate him because he was a monster who hurt children for his country. They simply took one look at his outsides and decided they didn't want anything to do with him. It was unfair, but so was life. He pinched the bridge of his nose again and went back to typing. He needed to finish up this report for today's lessons so he could get some sleep and do it all again tomorrow. Perhaps there would be an email from Janice tomorrow. Perhaps he would finally muster up the courage to send an email to his daughter tomorrow, and maybe he would even hear back from her. That was the good thing about tomorrow. You could always delude yourself into thinking it was full of possibilities. Miss Cashmere had nearly been asleep when someone knocked on the door of her small room. She grimaced and checked the time. It was about 10 o'clock, and most people knew that she liked to be asleep by 9:30. She'd brushed her teeth, gotten into her pajamas, and taken her sleep aid. And now she was getting ready to drift off to sleep when someone had decided to come and bother her. She thought she knew who it was usually the same person, and she decided it was time to have a talk with them about boundaries. She got up and turned on the nightlight on her bedside table before heading to the door, and opened it to find one of the IT guys standing there with a cheap bottle of wine and a cheesy grin stretched across his face. His name was Gavin, and she had an on-again, off-again thing with him. He was nice enough, not bad to look at, and a generous lover, but he could be tiresome as well. He reminded her of the Leonard character from The Big Bang Theory, Nice and sweet, but a little too clingy and naive for her taste. He was also young enough to be one of her kids. Jensen was 5 years younger than him, but already seemed more mature. That wasn't a deal breaker for her. He was over 18 and had pursued her, but it was still a little creepy when she stopped to think about it sometimes. "Hey there," he said as the door came open, holding the wine like a game show host showing off his wares. Cook was getting ready to throw out some wine, but it's perfectly in date, and I see no reason that we shouldn't enjoy it. Would you like to share a glass with me? It's still pretty early." "Sorry, Gavin. I've already taken my sleep aid, and I think I'm going to turn in. I've got a busy day tomorrow, and I've got to keep my head around little Masha, unless I want it to explode." Gavin smiled, but he had a funny look on his face. He looked as if his disappointment was twined with something like anger. Not real anger. Gavin was too much of a wuss for anything hotter than petulance, but he might have at least come all the way to disappointment. He'd clearly thought that going out of his way to get something nice for her would earn him some time in her bed, and now that wasn't happening, and he felt frustrated and petulant, like the child that he was. "Seems like you haven't had any time for me since you started your new class. Maybe you've outgrown me." Miss Cashmere tried not to roll her eyes. She had outgrown him before she met him. Gavin was sweet, but she had a husband at home waiting for her, as well as a couple of kids in high school. It was a private high school, tuition paid for by generous contributions from the Blacksite and the federal government, and both of her children were far more emotionally mature than the man standing in her doorway. The kids sure did wish that Mama could be home more often. So did her husband, for that matter, but a little separation was nice sometimes. It let her truly be herself and maybe find something new and strange before going home to her loving husband. "This is a little different than teaching blue band, sweetie. This kid could be dangerous if she's not instructed just right. It's like training dogs. You have to keep your wits about you or you're going to get bit." "I wouldn't mind a little nibble sometime," Gavin said, trying to be cute but barely making it to annoying. "Maybe another time. I'm already starting to get drowsy. If you catch me this weekend, maybe I'll have some time for you." He was starting to become tiresome, and she wanted him to take a hint and go away. "Okay," he said, perking up a little as he realized he might still have a chance. Maybe I'll catch you on Saturday. They're watching a basketball game in the teacher's lounge, so I don't think anybody'll notice if the two of us slip off." She smiled and tried not to let her skin crawl too much at the prospect. "Until then," she said, as she leaned forward to kiss him on the cheek before closing and locking her door firmly. She was going to have to break things off with him soon. Gavin was getting clingy, and he just wasn't emotionally mature enough to have a friends with benefits kind of relationship. He had spoken to her more than once about having a life together outside this place, but she had always reminded him that there was no life for them outside of here. She would return to her family, and he would return to his apartment or wherever he stayed when he wasn't here. They could only really be together here, and despite how many times she had said as much, she didn't think he was ever going to get it. She was asleep about 5 minutes later, her dreams filled with Gavin's clumsy hands and honeyed words as he lay her down for the night. Security Chief Ridley saw the door close and smiled as Gavin slunk off with his wine. On another monitor, he watched Cutter as he lifted weights, as if it would give him the special powers that so many of his students possessed. On another screen, he watched a couple of other IT guys as they sat in the cafeteria and drank whiskey from plastic cups. Gavin wandered in, and they offered to share the bottle of wine. Soon he was laughing and passing it around as he drank some of their whiskey and forgot about his failures of a moment before. Not much escaped the notice of Security Chief Ridley. He often spent his evenings sitting behind the screen in his office and keeping an eye on everyone within the facility. He could even see the little doctor as he sat in his quarters and obsessed over a report that he was writing. There weren't a lot of places that they didn't have cameras, and the places they didn't have them were more about decorum than anything. Ridley had a few cameras in some of those places, but nobody but him knew about that. He'd made it a rule not to have them in the children's bathrooms, however. Something like that seemed wrong, even to him, and he was a man who regularly tortured children for the good of his nation. Something about watching the little kids as they did their business, however, seemed a step too far. There had to be a line drawn somewhere, or what was to separate him from the animals and the politicians. Ridley was a man who hoarded secrets like a spider hoards flies. He sat in his web and watched the comings and goings of everyone below and gathered up his flies for the time when he might need them. You never knew when someone was going to get the bright idea to try for his job, and Ridley wanted to be able to dangle something juicy and scandalous over them so they would shut up and fall back in line. It was the thing that had ultimately doomed his predecessor, and the secrets were how he had gotten to the center of the web, something he felt was well-deserved. The coffee came up to his mouth as he took a sip, his eyes never leaving the monitors. Security Chief Ridley knew that something was afoot, and he wanted to get to the bottom of it before it threatened everything he had worked for. He wasn't going to lose his web to a bunch of snot-nosed kids or a bunch of greedy adults. When it came down to it, Ridley would rather burn the place down himself and rebuild from the ashes than let them light the fire. If it were all to fall apart, then let it crumble by his hand rather than theirs.